Today, Ms. Collins, we will be doing some x-rays requested by your physician.
I'd like you to have a seat.
Do you have a necklace on?
No.
Do you have any bobby pins or barrettes?
No.
Do you have any removable dentures?
No.
No. Any bridge work?
No.
Okay, I'm going to need you to remove those earrings for me.
Okay.
The Franklin Radiographic headstand is a unit designed primarily for cranial and facial examinations. The first part of this tape is to familiarize you with the operation of the Franklin Radiographic headstand. All operations and movements will be covered, as well as the operations of various accessories. The Franklin Radiographic headstand consists of 5 basic sections. The support column anchors to the floor and can be mounted to either the ceiling or wall at the top. The tube arm supports the X-ray tube mounted on a carriage. The carriage provides movement for the X-ray tube for stereo views and centering purposes, as well as angulation of the X-ray tube. The tube arm is equipped with an adjustable counterweight for precise balancing. The bucky is equipped with a reciprocating grid carrier mechanism that accommodates a removable 8:1 ratio 80-line grid for 36-inch target-to-film distance. The clear plastic front of the bucky is inscribed with film centering lines that are visible from the rear of the bucky, with the grid and cassette tray withdrawn for accurate centering of the patient. The bucky support structure has a crank-operated mechanism for centering cassettes to the central ray. Also provided is a 90-degree rotation of the bucky in a plane perpendicular to the central ray, so that the loading end of the bucky can be rotated to the side. The 5th basic section of the headstand is the overriding section. This carries the tube arm and bucky, providing a vertical movement for these sections. It is equipped with a manually operated lock located at the rear. For convenience, the tube arm and bucky can be turned around the column to either side position. The tube arm and bucky are locked together by the bucky and tube arm interlock. When this lock is engaged, the interlocked tube arm and bucky may be rotated 360 degrees with the central ray always centered to the center of the film. To angulate the tube arm, release the bucky and tube arm interlock. Rotate the tube arm to the desired angle and lock into place using the lock knob. The degree of angulation is read from the angulation scale on the top of the bucky support structure, or the scale behind the bucky support structure. The angulation of the bucky is accomplished in much the same manner. Rotate the bucky to the desired angle using the scale as a reference. Lock in place using the lock knob. In cases where it is desired to use auxiliary equipment with the headstand, such as film changers, bucky tables, or wall cassette holders, the headstand bucky may be lowered out of the exposure field. To do this, position the tube arm vertical and the face of the bucky horizontal. Lock the bucky in this position using the bucky angulation lock knob. Remove the grid and cassette tray. Turn the safety lock out to clear the seat. Grasp the front part of the bucky to support it and release the plunger lock as shown. Lower the bucky until the plunger lock re-engages in the down position hole. The bucky may be rotated to the side for cassette insertion. To accomplish this, crank the bucky to the center position using the centering crank. This center position is also read from the scale on the bottom rear of the bucky. Pull the plunger lock and rotate the bucky 90 degrees counterclockwise until the plunger lock re-engages. The bucky may also be rotated 90 degrees clockwise and locked in position if desired. The Franklin Radiographic headstand has a unique method of film centering. Under the following conditions, no matter what angle or what size film is used, the central ray is always centered to the center of the film. To ensure that the central ray is aimed towards the center of the film size used, place the cassette tray carrier to the left using the tray position pop pin. Place the cassette against the left-hand side of the cassette tray and apply the self-centering cassette clamps to the cassette. Raise or lower the bucky using the crank as shown until the size marking on the scale corresponds to the film size being used. The duplicate numbers shown on the lower portion of the scale are used only when the cassette tray carrier is used in its alternate position. If it is necessary to swing the tube arm to the right when positioning patients in the erect position, the cassette tray carrier must be placed in the alternate position and the cassette placed to the right of the tray. The centering lines on the opposite end of the scale are used when the tube arm is rotated to the right. To further assure that the central ray will always be directed to the center of the film, regardless of the tube or bucky angle, release two knobs and push the carriage until the lines are aligned and the indicator reads 0. This knob locks the carriage to the rail, and this knob locks the tube angulation. To position the tube at other than the center of the bucky, tighten this knob, pull out the plunger lock, and pull the stereo shift bar out from under the two carriage rollers. The carriage can now be moved along the rails. This operation is also necessary when angling the X-ray tube laterally to the bucky. Grasp the X-ray tube firmly and release the lock knob and angle the tube to the desired angle using the indicator. Position along the rails and lock in position with the travel lock. For self-centering stereo, which automatically provides a 3.6-inch tube shift and the correct angulation of the X-ray tube, release the locks. Move the carriage as far to the side as possible. Lock into place with the travel lock and make the first exposure. To make the second exposure, move the carriage to the rear as far as possible. Lock in place with the travel lock. When finished, return to the center position to assure proper centering for non-stereo radiography. In addition, stereo radiographs may be taken by angulating the tube arm approximately 2.5 degrees in either direction from the angle indicated on the bucky rotation scale. The 8x10 2-on-1 sinus and mastoid tunnel. The lead-protected tunnel diaphragm is inserted in place of the cassette tray to obtain two circular views on one 8x10 film. For the first exposure, push the adapter into the tunnel until it is stopped by the tunnel wall. For the second exposure, pull outward until the spring stop holding lock is engaged. The bucky tray position must be set at 12 rather than 8 when the 2-on-1 tunnel is used. The Franklin headstand is supplied with 3 stainless steel covered lead diaphragms which will sharply cone an area from a 5-inch circle to a full 10x12 rectangle. Note that the square structure of the cone allows the insertion of 8x10 and 10x12-inch diaphragms to cover the cassettes placed either lengthwise or crosswise in the cassette tray. 2 mounting bars are provided on the bucky to accommodate the head clamp. Position the patient laterally by sliding the clamp along the mounting bar and lock in place. The patient's head is secured between the 2 plastic cylinders by means of the control knob and locked by turning this knob. Both cylinders are adjustable up and down by means of the sliding bars and lock knobs. The plastic cylinders are attached to the sliding bars by means of friction joints so that they may be swiveled to adapt to the patient's head. The mobile head chair is platform mounted on swivel casters for ease of positioning and equipped with foot-operated floor locks to lock in the desired position. The arms can be rotated by lifting up and swung out of the way to facilitate seating patients. The back of the chair is open construction to facilitate injections when it is desired to use the chair for encephalographic studies. The mobile radiographic stretcher is provided with a radiolucent top and extension headpiece. Also included are swivel casters for ease of positioning and lever-actuated jack-type floor locks for securing the stretcher in the desired position. Following is a demonstration of patient positioning when using the headstand. The procedures shown will be discussed in general terms since specific tube angulations, centering points, film sizes, and required views vary from one institution to another. Certain design characteristics of the headstand should be utilized to full advantage when aligning the unit and the patient. The principal feature to keep in mind is that regardless of the angle to which the bucky or tube is placed, the central ray is always centered to the film. This assumes, however, that three operations are correctly performed. 1. The tube carriage is properly centered on the stereo shift bar. 2. The cassette has been correctly centered in the bucky. And 3. The depth of cut scale is set at bucky position. If those three conditions are assured, full and undivided attention can be applied to positioning the patient with respect to the film and central ray. For radiography of cranial bones with the patient sitting, the antero-posterior semiaxial projection, or town position, is performed with the bucky angled 15 degrees towards the patient. The patient is instructed to tuck the chin in so as to place the orbital meatal line nearly perpendicular to the film plane. Angle the tube so it forms a 30-degree caudal angle to the orbital meatal line. The central ray is centered to enter 8 centimeters superior to the glabella and exit through the foramen magnum. Position the head so the mid-sagittal plane is perpendicular to the film plane. After assuring proper centering, apply the head clamps. When performing the axial or submental vertex projection, the bucky is again angled 15 degrees towards the patient. The patient is instructed to hyperextend the neck to place the infraorbital meatal line parallel to the film plane. Position the tube so the central ray is perpendicular to the infraorbital meatal line and passes 3/4 of an inch anterior to the external auditory meatus. Ensure that the mid-sagittal plane is perpendicular to the film plane. When centered correctly, apply the head clamps. A variation in centering makes this position applicable to demonstrating zygomatic arches, sinuses, or petrous ridges. For the PA projection of the skull, place the bucky in a vertical position. Place the patient's nose and forehead in contact with the centering line on the bucky surface. Partially remove the grid and tray so as to view the centering from the rear. The 12-inch centering line should be at the level of the glabella. Depending upon the routine of the department, position the tube so the central ray may be directed either parallel to the orbital meatal line or angled 15 degrees caudally to it. Ensure that the mid-sagittal plane is perpendicular to the film plane and apply the head clamps. With a variation in tube angle, this positioning is similar to that required for demonstrating sinuses and orbits. For the lateral projection of the cranial bones, place the bucky in the vertical position. Position the patient so the shoulder is beneath the bucky. Patients with short necks require that the shoulder be placed against the bucky surface with the head rotated to the side. Position the head so the interpupillary line is perpendicular to the film plane. The central ray is projected parallel to the interpupillary line. Ensure that the mid-sagittal plane is parallel to the film. The patient should be centered so that the central ray traverses the cranium just anterior and superior to the external auditory meatus. If properly centered, apply the head clamps. One of the more valuable positions for demonstrating the facial structures is the Waters position. It is accomplished by either having the bucky vertical or tilting the bucky approximately 15 degrees from the patient. Place the patient's chin on the bucky front and center the patient so the acanthion is directly above the centering line for the size of cassette being used. Adjust the patient's head so the mental-meatal line is perpendicular to the plane of the film. Adjust the tube so the central ray is projected perpendicular to the plane of the film and exits through the acanthion. Ensure that the mid-sagittal plane is perpendicular to the plane of the film. When properly positioned, apply the head clamps. A position commonly employed to demonstrate the mastoid process and petrous ridge is the Stenver's position. This is easily accomplished on the headstand by placing the bucky in a vertical position. Place the patient's nose, cheek, and forehead in contact with the bucky front. This should place the infraorbital meatal line perpendicular to the plane of the film. Adjust the patient's head so the mid-sagittal plane forms an angle of 45 degrees to the film plane. Angle the tube so the central ray is projected 12 degrees cephalically. The mastoid process and petrous ridge closest to the film are demonstrated. The Reese position is commonly used to demonstrate the optic foramen. It requires the bucky to be placed vertically. The patient is positioned so the cheek, chin, and nose are in contact with the bucky front. The acanthomeatal line should be perpendicular to the film plane. The mid-sagittal plane is to form an angle of 53 degrees from the film plane. Place the tube at 90 degrees to the bucky. The central ray is then projected perpendicular to the film plane. Correct centering is accomplished by placing the eye closest to the bucky front, directly over the appropriate centering line. The axiolateral projection of the mandible is performed by angling the bucky 25 degrees away from the patient. Position the side of the patient's head against the bucky front so the interpupillary line is perpendicular to the film plane. If the mandibular body is of primary interest, position so the mid-sagittal plane is rotated 10 degrees to the film plane. Position the tube so the central ray is directed horizontally and forms an angle of 25 degrees to the film and interpupillary line. If the ramus of the mandible is of primary interest, the mid-sagittal plane should be parallel with the film. The central ray is directed 10 degrees cephalically, so a total angle of 35 degrees exists between it and the film plane. Only a few of the many positions required for cranial and facial radiography have been demonstrated. However, all are applicable to the headstand. Also, the headstand can be used in radiography of the neck, extremities, shoulder and clavicle, gallbladder, and many others. The Franklin radiographic headstand may also be used for body section radiography. The body section attachment permits body section radiography to be accomplished with the patient either recumbent or erect. The components of the body section attachment include a permanently mounted control having an amplitude selector and a selector for speed of tube movement. A 0 to 18 centimeter depth of cut adjustment is provided. Also, a separate tube arm and bucky connecting rod is included. To position the headstand for horizontal body section radiography, begin with the main bucky and tube arm interlock engaged. Bring the bucky to a position where its face is parallel to the floor and lock with both the tube arm and bucky lock knob. Then, disconnect the main interlock. Crank the bucky film position crank until the line on the front support rod reads center on the scale. Place the cassette in the center of the cassette tray. In order to install the connecting rod, Crank the bucky to approximately 8 centimeters on the depth of cut scale using the crank. Now slide the lower end disc of the connecting rod over the shoulder behind the knob. Be sure that the pivot hole of the connecting rod goes over the pivot pin on the front of the bucky hub. Secure the 2 captive thumb screws at the top of the connecting rod to the tube arm. Determine the proper depth of cut required and set on the scale using the depth of cut crank. Now the body section switch on the X-ray control can be turned on. Release the tube arm lock knob and cock the tube to the left as you face the headstand until it locks in its start position electrically. Now establish the amplitude desired in degrees and set on the angular amplitude dial. The lower dial establishes amplitude speed. It includes 4 concentric circles, 1 for each amplitude, and 3 motor speed settings. Set the pointer to the desired time in seconds for the amplitude selected on the upper dial. Set the X-ray timer to a slightly longer time than the speed setting selected on the body section control. It will then act as a backup safety timer. Start the rotor, close the exposure switch, and the body section device will operate. Hold the exposure switch closed until the tube arm has completed its excursion and locked into its stop position. To release the tube arm from its final stop position, it is necessary to depress the brake release switch on the body section control. To return the headstand to a conventional radiographic device, turn the body section switch off at the X-ray control. Set the main bucky and tube arm interlock so that it will engage and rotate the tube arm to a perpendicular position. Remove the connecting rod and return the tray position pop pin to its normal position to the left. Return the depth of cut pointer to bucky position and crank the bucky film position to 8, 10, or 12. The headstand is now ready for conventional headstand examinations. For vertical body section examinations, engage the main tube arm and bucky interlock as before. However, at this time, also engage the auxiliary pop pin. This is a safety device that is used when the bucky is turned into a vertical position. Center the bucky and crank the bucky to the nominal 8 centimeter depth. Now install the connecting rod. Lock the bucky rotation lock knob, unlock the tube arm lock, and disconnect the bucky and tube arm interlock. Rotate the tube to the lower position until it electrically engages. Determine the proper depth of cut and continue using the same routine as applied during an examination with the bucky horizontal.
Ms. Collins, your radiographs turned out technically fine. I do not know the results of your tests, but the doctor will tell you when he receives a report from our radiologist. Don't smile. Ms. Collins, you've been very cooperative. I hope your doctor is able to find your problem and solve it. Right this way and I'll show you how to find it.